Tonight we journey back to one of the most haunting mysteries in maritime history, the 4th of December, 1872. The middle of the Atlantic Ocean, halfway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, a merchant vessel called the Dei Gratia cuts through gray waters under a pale winter sky. Captain David Morehouse stands on deck, scanning the horizon as sailors do, watching for weather, for other ships, for anything unusual. And then he sees it, a vessel in the distance, moving strangely, erratically, as if drunk or damaged, sails partially set, rigging loose and flapping in the wind. The ship lurches forward without purpose or direction. Captain Morehouse raises his spyglass and studies the distant vessel. His blood runs cold. He recognizes her, the brigantine, Mary Celeste. He knows this ship. He knows her captain. Just weeks ago, he dined with Captain Benjamin Briggs in New York before both men set sail for the Mediterranean. The Mary Celeste left port 8 days before the Dei Gratia, following the same route, carrying a cargo of industrial alcohol to Genoa. But now she drifts alone, her movements suggesting no hand at the wheel, no crew managing her sails. Captain Morehouse orders signals. Flags are raised. Calls echo across the water. No response. The Mary Celeste continues her aimless path, silent, seemingly abandoned. Something is terribly wrong. For hours, the Dei Gratia follows at a distance, waiting, watching, calling, still nothing. Finally, Captain Morehouse makes a decision. He orders his chief mate, Oliver DeVoe, to take a boarding party and investigate. 3 men climb into a small boat and row across the choppy waters. They approach the Mary Celeste cautiously, calling out, announcing themselves. Silence greets them. They climb aboard. The deck is empty. Rigging hangs loose, some sails torn and others partially furled. Water sloshes in the hold, 3 feet deep, but not enough to sink the ship. The boarding party moves carefully, checking the wheel, the compass, the deck equipment. Everything suggests a ship abandoned in haste, yet nothing suggests why. They descend below deck, and here, the mystery deepens into something that will haunt maritime history for 150 years. In the captain's cabin, they find the ordinary details of interrupted life. A breakfast table with plates and cups, food half-eaten, as if the diners simply stood and walked away mid-meal. Sarah Briggs' sewing rests on a chair, the needle still threaded, waiting for hands that will never return. On the cabin floor, small toys are scattered. These belonged to Sophia Briggs, the captain's 2-year-old daughter, a child's playthings, left behind in whatever rushed exodus emptied this vessel of its people. The crew quarters tell the same eerie story. Bunks still hold the personal belongings of sailors. Clothes hang on pegs. Tobacco pipes rest on small shelves. Sea chests remain locked, their contents untouched. In the galley, the stove is cold but shows signs of recent use. Food provisions fill the storage areas, enough supplies for 6 months at sea. Fresh water in the barrels. Everything a crew would need to complete their voyage. Yet, no crew remains. 10 people were aboard the Mary Celeste when she left New York. Captain Benjamin Briggs, age 37, a respected master mariner from a family of sea captains. His wife Sarah, age 30, devoted and steady, trusted by her husband to manage the domestic life aboard ship. Their daughter, Sophia, barely 2 years old, blue-eyed and curious, too young to understand the adventure her parents had brought her on. The first mate, Albert Richardson, age 28, an experienced sailor Captain Briggs had specifically requested for this voyage. Second mate, Andrew Gilling, age 25, from Denmark, known for his competence with navigation. The cook, Edward Head, a German immigrant who had served on merchant vessels for years. and 4 able seamen, Volkert Lorenzen and Bas Lorenzen, brothers from Germany, Arian Martens, also German, and Gottlieb Gondeschall, whose skills as a sailor were well documented, 10 souls. Experienced, capable, carefully chosen, all vanished without a trace, without struggle, without any sign of violence or panic. The boarding party from the Dei Gratia searches every corner of the ship, looking for clues, for bodies, for any explanation. They find none. What they do find adds to the mystery rather than solving it. The ship's lifeboat is gone. The davits, the mechanical arms that hold the boat, are empty. Clearly, the lifeboat was launched, not torn away by storm or accident, but deliberately released. Someone made the decision to abandon ship and take the lifeboat. But why? The Mary Celeste was seaworthy. She had food, water, and cargo intact. There was no reason to abandon her. The navigation equipment tells another strange story. The ship's chronometer, an essential instrument for determining longitude at sea, is missing. So is the sextant, used for celestial navigation. These are tools a captain would take if planning to navigate away from the ship. Captain Briggs's logbook is also gone, though the ship's daily log remains. Its last entry dated November 25, more than a week before the Dei Gratia found her. The ship's register and other important papers have been taken as well. This suggests a deliberate, somewhat organized departure, not a panicked flight. But here is where logic fractures. A length of rope trails in the water behind the Mary Celeste, one end secured to the ship, the other end frayed and broken. This rope suggests a theory, one that many investigators would later consider. Perhaps the crew did not intend to abandon ship permanently. Perhaps they tied the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with this rope, planning to wait out some danger at a safe distance, then return. But if so, what danger and what broke the rope? Before we follow the investigation that consumed months of testimony and speculation, let us go back to the beginning. Let us trace the Mary Celeste's journey from New York Harbor to the moment she was found drifting and empty. Let us understand the ship, her captain, and the decisions that led to this lonely voyage across the Atlantic. The Mary Celeste was not always called by that name. She was built in 1861 at the Joshua Dewis Shipyard in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, during the early years of the American Civil War. Originally christened the Amazon, she was a modest merchant brigantine, 100 feet long with a beam of 25 feet. Her design was practical rather than elegant, built for cargo rather than speed. She could carry roughly 400 tons, making her ideal for transatlantic trade routes. From her very first voyage, the Amazon seemed cursed. Her first captain, Robert McClellan, fell ill during her maiden voyage and died before reaching port. Command passed to his first mate, who completed the journey, but the incident cast a shadow over the vessel. Over the next several years, the Amazon passed through multiple owners, each experiencing misfortune. She was damaged in a collision in the English Channel. She ran aground off the coast of Maine. Fire broke out in her hold during a voyage carrying timber. Sailors began to whisper that the ship was unlucky, that she carried some dark fate within her wooden bones. In 1868, an American consortium purchased the vessel, made extensive repairs, and renamed her the Mary Celeste, hoping a new name might break whatever curse seemed to follow her. The name change follows maritime tradition, where renaming a ship is thought to give her a fresh start, a new identity free from past troubles. For a few years, this seemed to work. The Mary Celeste sailed without major incident under her new name, carrying cargo between American ports and the Mediterranean. By 1872, she was owned by a group that included James Winchester, a successful merchant and part owner of several vessels. Winchester hired Captain Benjamin Briggs as master for a voyage carrying industrial alcohol from New York to Genoa. It seemed a routine assignment, a standard cargo run that Briggs had done dozens of times before. But Captain Briggs made one unusual decision. He chose to bring his family. Benjamin Briggs was born in 1,835 inches, Wareham, Massachusetts, into a family where the sea was not just a profession, but a calling. His father, Nathan Briggs, was a ship's captain. His brothers were captains. The ocean was in his blood, and he took to it naturally, rising through the ranks with skill and dedication. By his mid-30s, he was recognized as one of the more reliable masters in the merchant fleet, known for his steady temperament and his religious faith. He carried a small melodeon, a type of reed organ, on his voyages and often played hymns in the evening. Sailors who served under him described a captain who was firm but fair, who did not tolerate drinking or profanity aboard his vessels, and who inspired confidence even in rough seas. In 1862, Briggs married Sarah Elizabeth Cobb, the daughter of a congregational minister. Sarah was intelligent and strong-willed, unusual for her time in that she was educated and well-read. She adapted to the role of a sea captain's wife with grace, understanding that the ocean would claim much of her husband's time. When their first child, Arthur, was born in 1865, Sarah began occasionally accompanying Benjamin on shorter voyages, bringing the boy when he was old enough to travel safely. She was not afraid of the sea and trusted her husband's judgment completely. Their second child, Sophia Matilda, was born in 1870. By 1872, Arthur was 7 years old and attending school in Marion, Massachusetts, where the family maintained a home. When Captain Briggs accepted command of the Mary Celeste for the voyage to Genoa, he faced a decision. The trip would take several weeks, perhaps 2 months round trip. He could go alone, as many captains did, or he could bring Sarah and young Sophia with him. Arthur would stay home to continue his schooling under the care of relatives. Sarah's letters from this period reveal a woman who relished these voyages. She wrote to her mother-in-law about the prospect of the journey with evident enthusiasm, describing her preparations and her excitement at seeing new ports. For Sophia, not yet 3 years old, it would be an adventure, though she was too young to understand where they were going or why. Captain Briggs made the arrangements. His wife and daughter would sail with him aboard the Mary Celeste. This decision was not unprecedented. Many captains brought their families on longer voyages, especially when the route was considered relatively safe and the accommodations adequate. The captain's cabin on the Mary Celeste was spacious enough for a small family, with separate sleeping areas and room for Sarah's personal effects and Sophia's toys. The presence of women and children aboard merchant vessels was uncommon but not unheard of, particularly on ships where the captain owned a share of the vessel and had authority to make such decisions. Captain Briggs carefully selected his crew. As master, he had the responsibility and the right to choose the men who would sail under his command. He wanted experienced sailors, men he could trust, and men who would respect the presence of his family aboard. His first choice was Albert Richardson, age 28, as first mate. Richardson was a capable navigator and had sailed with Briggs before. The two men understood each other, and Briggs knew Richardson could be relied upon in difficult situations. For second mate, Briggs selected Andrew Gilling, a 25-year-old Danish sailor with several years of experience on Atlantic routes. Gilling's knowledge of weather patterns and his skill with the sextant made him a valuable addition. The cook, Edward Head, was German, as were most of the able seamen. This was common in the merchant marine of the 1,872nd, as European immigrants often found work on American vessels. The Lorenzen brothers, Volkert and Boz, had served together on previous voyages and worked well as a team. Arian Martens and Gottlieb Gondeschall completed the crew, both experienced in the handling of cargo and the management of a brigantine's rigging. These were not desperate men taking whatever work they could find. Each had sailed on multiple vessels, each had references, and each had been chosen specifically by Captain Briggs. The crew was small, just 7 men plus the captain, but adequate for a vessel the size of the Mary Celeste on a transatlantic crossing. In fair weather, 4 men could manage the ship, working in watches, allowing the others to rest. In storms, all hands would be needed, but this was expected and accepted as part of maritime life. The cargo was 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, also called methylated spirits. This was not drinking alcohol but industrial alcohol, used in Italy for fortifying wine and for manufacturing processes. Denatured alcohol contains additives that make it undrinkable and poisonous, ensuring it would not be consumed by the crew or sold illegally as beverage alcohol. The cargo was loaded in New York over several days in late October 1872. Each barrel carefully stowed in the hold, secured with ropes and wedges to prevent shifting during the voyage. Denatured alcohol is volatile. It evaporates quickly and produces flammable vapors. Shipping it required care, proper ventilation, and secure barrels to minimize leakage. The barrels were made of red oak, a wood chosen for its strength and its relative impermeability to alcohol. They were sealed with wooden bungs, driven tight. The Mary Celeste's hold was designed to carry such cargo, with ventilation hatches that could be opened in good weather to allow fumes to escape. Captain Briggs inspected the loading himself, ensuring each barrel was properly secured and that the manifest was accurate. The cargo was insured, as was standard practice, and the paperwork was meticulously maintained. The value of the cargo was roughly $35,000, a significant sum in 1872, though not extraordinary for a transatlantic shipment. The Mary Celeste herself was insured for $14,000. Everything was in order. The ship was seaworthy, the crew experienced, the cargo properly stowed, and the weather forecasts, while predicting rough conditions, showed nothing unusual for an Atlantic crossing in November. Captain Briggs wrote several letters home in the days before departure, letters that reveal his state of mind and his expectations. In one letter to his mother, he wrote that the crew seemed capable and that he felt confident about the voyage. He mentioned Sarah's excitement and little Sophia's delight at being aboard a ship. In another letter to his business partner, he discussed the cargo and the expected arrival time in Genoa, calculating that with favorable winds, they might make the crossing in under 3 weeks. There was no hint of anxiety, no premonition of disaster. These were the practical, optimistic words of a man embarking on a routine voyage. The Mary Celeste was scheduled to depart on the 30th of October, 1872, but weather delayed the sailing. Strong winds and rain kept her tied to the dock in New York Harbor for more than a week. Captain Briggs waited patiently, using the time to make final checks of the rigging and to ensure the crew was prepared. Sarah and Sophia settled into the captain's cabin, arranging their belongings and growing accustomed to the gentle rocking of the ship at anchor. Finally, on the 7th of November 1872, the weather cleared enough for departure. The Mary Celeste cast off from Pier 50 on the East River and made her way out of New York Harbor, past Staten Island, and into the open Atlantic. The departure was witnessed by dock workers and recorded in the harbor master's log. As the city receded behind her, the Mary Celeste set her course east-northeast, heading for the Strait of Gibraltar and the Mediterranean beyond. 8 days later, On November 15, another ship departed from New York following the same route. This was the Dei Gracia, a slightly larger brigantine under the command of Captain David Morehouse. Morehouse was a Nova Scotian, like many merchant captains of the era, and he had known Captain Briggs for years. In fact, just before the Mary Celeste sailed, Morehouse and Briggs dined together, discussing their respective voyages and the challenges of the autumn Atlantic crossing. They parted as friends, each wishing the other fair winds and safe passage. The Dei Gracia carried a cargo of petroleum in barrels, bound for Gibraltar. Like the Mary Celeste, she was a working merchant vessel, built for profit rather than comfort, manned by a small crew of experienced sailors. Captain Morehouse expected to make the crossing in reasonable time and to arrive in Gibraltar sometime in early December. He had no reason to think he would encounter the Mary Celeste again. Two ships on the same route, separated by 8 days, their paths unlikely to cross in the vastness of the Atlantic. For the first 2 weeks of her voyage, the Mary Celeste made steady progress. The daily log, maintained by First Mate Richardson, records the ship's position, the weather conditions, and the routine operations of a vessel at sea. November in the North Atlantic is unpredictable. There are days of calm when the ocean stretches flat and gray to the horizon, and there are days of storm when waves tower and winds shriek through the rigging. The Mary Celeste experienced both. On November 24, the log notes that the ship was approaching the Azores, a chain of volcanic islands roughly 900 miles west of Portugal. These islands are a navigational landmark for ships crossing the Atlantic, and many vessels adjusted their course slightly to pass near them, using the islands to confirm their position. The weather on November 24 was rough, with strong winds from the north and heavy seas. This was not unusual. The log entry is matter of fact, noting the conditions without alarm. The final entry in the log is dated the 25th of November, 1872. First Mate Richardson recorded the ship's position as approximately 6 miles off the eastern coast of Santa Maria Island, the southernmost island in the Azores chain. The notation is routine. The weather is described as difficult but manageable. There is no indication of distress, no mention of danger, no suggestion that anything out of the ordinary was occurring. After this entry, the log is silent. What happened in the 9 days between November 25 and December 4? This is the heart of the mystery. During those 9 days, the Mary Celeste traveled roughly 400 miles, drifting eastward with the prevailing winds and currents. She was found approximately halfway between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, still making some headway under her damaged sails, but clearly without anyone steering her or managing her course. Weather records from the period show that late November brought severe storms to the region. Ships in the area reported high winds, towering waves, and visibility reduced to almost nothing by rain and spray. It is likely that the Mary Celeste encountered at least one major storm during those 9 days. But storms alone do not explain an abandonment. Merchant vessels were built to withstand rough weather. Captains and crews knew how to heave to ride out storms by adjusting sails and allowing the ship to drift with the wind rather than fighting against it. Captain Briggs was an experienced seaman. He would not have abandoned ship simply because of heavy weather. So we return to December 4, to the moment when the Dei Gratia's lookout spotted the Mary Celeste on the horizon. Captain Morehouse watched through his spyglass as the strange vessel moved erratically, sails torn, rigging loose. For hours he followed at a distance, calling out, signaling, waiting for some response. When none came, he ordered the boarding party. Chief Mate Oliver DeVoe, along with Second Mate John Wright and Seaman John Johnson, rowed across to the Mary Celeste. They climbed aboard cautiously, calling out as they went, announcing themselves, listening for any reply. The deck was wet, recently washed by waves, but not dangerously flooded. 3 feet of water sloshed in the hold, but the pumps were functional, and the ship was in no immediate danger of sinking. One of the pumps had been disassembled and lay on the deck, suggesting someone had been working on it before the abandonment. The binnacle, the housing for the ship's compass, was damaged. The compass itself was displaced, no longer pointing true north. This would have made navigation difficult, but not impossible. The wheel turned freely, unattended, and the rudder responded normally. There was no damage to the hull, no signs of collision or grounding. The Mary Celeste was, in all essential ways, a sound and seaworthy vessel. Devoe descended into the captain's cabin. Here he found the domestic scene I described earlier, the sewing, the toys, the half-eaten meal. He also found the ship's register missing, along with the navigation instruments. The captain's bed was unmade, suggesting that the abandonment had occurred during the day rather than at night. In the crew quarters, the bunks were similarly disordered but showed no signs of struggle. Personal items remained where they had been placed. In the galley, food supplies were abundant. Preserved meats, dried beans, flour, sugar, coffee, and tea filled the storage lockers. Fresh water barrels were more than half full. There was enough to sustain the crew for months. The stove was cold, but there was kindling and coal ready to be lit. Dishes and utensils were neatly stored. Everything suggested a functioning ship with a crew that expected to return. Devoe made his way to the cargo hold. Here, the smell of alcohol was strong, almost overpowering. The hold was dark, lit only by the lantern Devoe carried, and the rows of barrels stretched into shadow. He counted them carefully. The manifest listed 1,701 barrels. Most appeared intact, properly stowed and secure, but 9 barrels were empty or damaged, their contents evaporated or leaked away. The wood of these barrels was stained dark, and the air around them reeked of alcohol fumes. This discovery would become central to later theories about what happened to the Mary Celeste. Denatured alcohol evaporates quickly, especially in warm or poorly ventilated spaces. The vapors are heavier than air and can accumulate in the lower parts of a ship's hold. These vapors are also highly flammable. A spark, a lantern flame, even static electricity can ignite them, causing an explosion. But there was no evidence of explosion aboard the Mary Celeste. No scorching, no blown-out hatches, no structural damage that would indicate fire or blast. Devoe returned to the deck and signaled to Captain Morehouse. The Mary Celeste was abandoned, but seaworthy. The cargo was largely intact. Under maritime law, a ship found abandoned at sea becomes the property of those who salvage her, with the salvagers entitled to a significant portion of the ship's value and the value of her cargo. This was a powerful incentive for Captain Morehouse, but it also presented a problem. He would need to divide his crew to sail both the Dei Gratia and the Mary Celeste to port, and he would need to prove in Admiralty Court that the Mary Celeste had indeed been abandoned and that no foul play was involved. Morehouse made his decision. He ordered Devoe to take 2 men from the Dei Gratia crew and sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, the nearest major port with an Admiralty Court. Devoe, along with Seaman Augustus Anderson and Charles Lund, transferred to the Mary Celeste. They repaired the worst of the rigging, set a minimal sail configuration, and began the slow journey toward Gibraltar. The Dei Gratia sailed alongside, the 2 ships making their way east together. The voyage took 9 days. On the 13th of December, 1872, both vessels arrived in Gibraltar and anchored in the harbor. Immediately, Captain Morehouse reported the situation to the authorities. The British officials in Gibraltar, responsible for maritime law in the region, took the matter seriously. An abandoned ship with a valuable cargo and no explanation for the crew's disappearance was both a legal puzzle and a potential scandal. The case was assigned to Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General for Gibraltar and the Advocate General in the Vice Admiralty Court. Flood was a meticulous and suspicious man, inclined to see conspiracy and crime where others might see accident or misfortune. He ordered a full survey of the Mary Celeste and began interviewing the crew of the Dei Gracia. What he heard did not satisfy him. Flood suspected that Captain Morehouse and his crew had murdered the people aboard the Mary Celeste and concocted the story of finding her abandoned in order to claim salvage rights. It was a dark theory, but not entirely without precedent. There had been cases in maritime history where crews killed each other over cargo or where one ship attacked another at sea, but the evidence did not support this theory. There was no blood on the Mary Celeste, no signs of violence, no indication of struggle. The cargo was intact and untouched. If pirates or murderers had taken the ship, why would they leave behind 1,701 barrels of valuable alcohol? Why would they leave money and personal effects in the cabins? Flood ordered a detailed examination of the ship. Surveyors inspected every inch of the Mary Celeste, looking for hidden damage, for bloodstains, for any clue that might reveal what happened. They found small traces of what appeared to be blood on the deck near the ship's wheel and on a sword found in the captain's cabin. This discovery excited Flood, who believed it confirmed his suspicions of violence. But further analysis revealed that the stains were not blood, but rust and other common residues found on ships. The sword was a decorative piece, a souvenir from Italy, and showed no signs of use in combat. The inquiry dragged on for 3 months. Witnesses from the Dei Gracia were called to testify repeatedly, their stories examined for inconsistencies. DeVoe described in detail what he found when he boarded the Mary Celeste. Captain Morehouse explained his relationship with Captain Briggs and his decision to claim salvage rights. The crew members who sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar testified about the condition of the ship and the repairs they made. Throughout all this testimony, no evidence of foul play emerged. Flood was forced to abandon his theory of murder, but he remained convinced that something suspicious had occurred. He suggested that perhaps Captain Briggs and his crew had conspired to abandon ship and claim insurance on the cargo, or that the crew had mutinied and killed the captain and his family before fleeing in the lifeboat. These theories made little sense. If Captain Briggs wanted to commit fraud, why would he bring his wife and infant daughter along? And if the crew had mutinied, why was there no evidence of struggle? The testimony also revealed important details about the missing lifeboat. The Mary Celeste had carried one large lifeboat secured in davits on the deck. The davits were empty, and a section of rail had been removed, the standard procedure for launching a lifeboat. This was not a boat torn away by storm. It had been deliberately lowered into the water. But lifeboats are not designed for long voyages. They are open boats, meant for short distances or for staying afloat until rescue arrives. In the rough seas of late November in the Atlantic, a lifeboat carrying 10 people would have been in grave danger. The frayed rope found trailing behind the Mary Celeste became an important clue. The rope was approximately 2 inches thick, strong enough to tow a lifeboat, but not strong enough to withstand days of strain in heavy weather. The frayed ends suggested that the rope had not been cut, but had broken under tension. This led to a theory that many investigators found plausible. Perhaps the crew had not intended to abandon ship permanently. Perhaps they had tethered the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste with this rope, planning to wait at a safe distance while some danger passed, then haul themselves back aboard once the danger was gone. But if the rope broke in rough seas, the lifeboat would have drifted away, and the Mary Celeste, still under partial sail, would have continued on her course, leaving the lifeboat behind. But what danger would have prompted such a decision? This is where the theories diverge, each one attempting to explain what could have frightened an experienced captain enough to order his crew into a lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic. The most widely accepted theory involves the cargo of denatured alcohol. As I mentioned, 9 barrels were found empty or damaged. The alcohol in these barrels had evaporated, creating a buildup of flammable vapors in the hold. In the enclosed space below deck, these vapors would have been concentrated and extremely dangerous. Denatured alcohol vapor is colorless and has a sharp, distinctive smell. A crew member checking the cargo might have opened the hatch to the hold and been met with a rush of fumes and the overwhelming smell of alcohol. In 1872, the dangers of alcohol vapor were understood, but the science was imprecise. Sailors knew that alcohol was flammable and that its fumes could explode. If Captain Briggs opened the hold and encountered a thick cloud of vapor, he might have feared that an explosion was imminent. The vapors, being heavier than air, would have pooled in the lowest parts of the hold, creating a volatile atmosphere. Even a small spark from a lantern or a bit of friction could have ignited them. Modern analysis suggests that while alcohol vapor can indeed explode under the right conditions, the conditions aboard the Mary Celeste were not quite right for a true explosion. The concentration of vapor would have needed to be within a specific range, too rich or too lean, and the mixture will not ignite. But Captain Briggs would not have known this. Faced with a hold full of alcohol fumes, smelling the sharp scent, seeing perhaps a faint haze in the air, he might have believed an explosion was seconds away. In such a situation, the decision to evacuate would make sense. Get everyone off the ship, quickly and calmly, and wait at a safe distance to see if the ship explodes. If it does, you are already in the lifeboat and can row to safety or wait for rescue. If it does not, you can return to the ship once the danger passes. The crew would have launched the lifeboat, loaded everyone aboard, and tethered it to the Mary Celeste with a long rope. They would have rowed a safe distance away, perhaps 100 yards or more, and waited. But they were in rough seas. The weather on November 25, the date of the last log entry, was described as difficult. Waves were high, winds strong. The Mary Celeste, even with minimal sail set, would have continued to move forward, straining against the rope. The lifeboat, riding low in the water with 10 people aboard, would have been tossed by waves. The rope would have been under constant tension, jerking and pulling with each swell. At some point, the rope broke. The frayed end found trailing behind the Mary Celeste tells us this much. Once the rope parted, the lifeboat would have drifted away. Captain Briggs and his crew would have tried to row back to the ship, but a lifeboat is heavy and difficult to row in rough seas, especially when loaded with 10 people. The Mary Celeste, under even partial sail, moves faster than men can row. Within minutes, the ship would have been beyond reach, sailing on alone while the lifeboat drifted helplessly. What happened to the lifeboat and its occupants? No wreckage was ever found. No bodies washed ashore. The Atlantic is vast, and the currents in the region around the Azores are complex and powerful. A small lifeboat could have drifted for days or even weeks before sinking or being swamped by waves. The people aboard would have faced exposure, thirst, and exhaustion. With no fresh water and no shelter from the sun or the cold, survival would have been measured in days at best. This theory, sometimes called the alcohol vapor theory, has gained support from modern maritime experts who have studied the case. It accounts for the missing lifeboat, the frayed rope, the lack of violence, and the presence of damaged alcohol barrels. It explains why the crew would have left a seaworthy ship and why they took the navigation instruments and the ship's papers, items Captain Briggs would have grabbed if planning to navigate away from the ship or if hoping to establish his identity when rescued. But it is not the only theory. Over the 150 years since the Mary Celeste was found abandoned, dozens of explanations have been proposed, ranging from the plausible to the absurd. One theory involves a waterspout. Waterspouts are tornadoes that form over water, and they are not uncommon in the Atlantic, especially near islands like the Azores, where temperature differences between land and sea can create atmospheric instability. A waterspout approaching the Mary Celeste would have been a terrifying sight, a swirling column of water and wind moving across the ocean toward the ship. If Captain Briggs saw a waterspout bearing down on him, he might have ordered the crew to abandon ship, fearing that the waterspout would capsize or destroy the vessel. The damaged binnacle, the housing for the compass, might support this theory. A waterspout passing close to the ship could have struck the deck with enough force to damage the binnacle without sinking the ship. Once the waterspout passed, the Mary Celeste would have been battered but still afloat. However, if the crew was already in the lifeboat, they would have been unable to return, especially if the rope broke during the event. Another theory involves a seaquake. The Azores are located on a tectonically active area where several tectonic plates meet. Underwater earthquakes are not rare in the region. A seaquake can create violent disturbances on the surface of the ocean, causing ships to shake and shudder as if struck by a massive blow. To those aboard, it can feel as though the ship is breaking apart, even when no structural damage is occurring. If the Mary Celeste was hit by a seaquake on November 25 or shortly after, the crew might have believed the ship was sinking. The violent shaking, combined with the sound of timbers groaning and the sudden movement of cargo in the hold, could have convinced Captain Briggs that the hull was compromised. He would have ordered an immediate evacuation, launching the lifeboat and getting everyone off the ship as quickly as possible. Only after the shaking stopped would they have realized the ship was not sinking. But by then, as with the other theories, the rope might have broken, leaving them stranded. Some theories veer into the implausible. Piracy is often mentioned, but it makes little sense. Pirates in the 1,872nd Atlantic were rare, and those who did operate in the area were interested in cargo and valuables. The Mary Celeste's cargo was untouched, and personal effects, including money, were left behind. There was no sign of boarding by another vessel, no damage from cannon fire or grappling hooks, and no evidence of the crew being taken captive. Mutiny is another theory that appears in discussions of the Mary Celeste, but it is equally weak. Captain Briggs was respected, the crew was experienced and well paid, and there was no motive for mutiny. Moreover, if the crew had killed the captain and his family, why would they then abandon ship and take the lifeboat? Where would they go? How would they explain their arrival in a lifeboat without the ship? The insurance fraud theory, suggesting that Captain Morehouse and Captain Briggs conspired to fake an abandonment and split the salvage money, falls apart under scrutiny. Both men were well regarded in maritime circles, both had reputations to protect, and the salvage payment, while substantial, was not enough to justify the risk of criminal conspiracy. Furthermore, the investigation found no evidence of contact between the two ships, between their departures from New York and the discovery of the Mary Celeste. The theory requires too many coincidences and too much coordination to be credible. Over the years, writers and storytellers have added layers of myth to the Mary Celeste mystery. Some claimed the ship was found with meals still warm on the table, though this was not true. Others suggested that strange markings or symbols were found on the deck, hinting at supernatural involvement. These embellishments, while dramatic, are not supported by the actual evidence. The true mystery is strange enough, without adding fiction. The Admiralty Court in Gibraltar finally concluded its inquiry in March 1873. Frederick Solly Flood, despite his suspicions, was forced to admit that he had no evidence of crime. The court ruled that the Mary Celeste had been legitimately salvaged and that the crew of the Dei Gratia was entitled to a salvage payment. However, the amount awarded was far less than what Morehouse and his crew had hoped for. Instead of receiving 1/2 the value of the ship and cargo, as was customary in salvage cases, they were awarded roughly 1/6. The court's decision reflected lingering doubts and a sense that something about the case remained unexplained. The Mary Celeste was released from custody and returned to service. She was repaired, her rigging replaced, her damaged sails mended. For the next 12 years, she sailed under various owners, carrying cargo across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. But her reputation as a cursed ship persisted. Sailors were reluctant to sign on for voyages aboard her, and she changed hands frequently, each owner eventually selling her off after a few years. In 1885, the Mary Celeste met an ignominious end. Her final owner, a man named Parker, deliberately ran her aground on a reef off the coast of Haiti in an attempt to commit insurance fraud. The plan was to claim the ship was lost in an accident and collect the insurance money, but the fraud was discovered, and Parker was prosecuted. The Mary Celeste, battered and broken on the reef, was abandoned for the final time. Her timbers were left to rot in the Caribbean sun, a sad conclusion for a ship that had become famous for all the wrong reasons. The fate of Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia, and the 7 crew members remains unknown. No bodies were ever recovered. No wreckage from the lifeboat was ever found. No trace of the 10 people who vanished from the Mary Celeste was ever discovered. They simply disappeared into the vastness of the Atlantic, leaving behind only questions. For Captain Briggs's family, the loss was devastating. His mother, who had received his optimistic letters before the voyage, never recovered from the disappearance of her son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. She died within a year, some said of a broken heart. Arthur Briggs, the 7-year-old boy who stayed home to attend school, grew up without his parents and his sister. He carried the mystery with him for the rest of his life, never knowing what happened to his family, never able to visit a grave or hold a memorial service. The not knowing, the absence of closure, is perhaps the cruelest aspect of the Mary Celeste mystery. Over the 150 years since the ship was found abandoned, the mystery has been investigated, analyzed, and debated by maritime historians, scientists, and amateur detectives. Books have been written, documentaries filmed, and theories proposed. Some researchers have conducted experiments, testing the alcohol vapor theory by recreating the conditions in the Mary Celeste's hold to see if explosive vapors could form. Others have analyzed weather patterns and ocean currents to determine where the lifeboat might have drifted. In 2002, a team of experts assembled by the Smithsonian Channel conducted a detailed investigation, reviewing all the available evidence and considering the various theories. They concluded that the alcohol vapor theory was the most plausible explanation. They noted that red oak barrels, while strong, are porous and can allow alcohol to seep through, especially if the barrels are not perfectly sealed. The 9 empty or damaged barrels found in the hold likely leaked their contents over days or weeks, creating a buildup of vapor. A sudden release of this vapor, triggered by opening the hold hatch, could have created a visible cloud and an overwhelming smell, convincing Captain Briggs that an explosion was imminent. The team also conducted experiments with alcohol vapor in enclosed spaces. They found that under certain conditions, the vapor could indeed create a brief flash fire, a sudden burst of flame that burns itself out almost immediately without causing structural damage. Such a flash fire, if it occurred in the hold of the Mary Celeste, would have been terrifying. but not necessarily destructive. It would have consumed the oxygen in the hold for a moment, creating a whooshing sound and a burst of heat, then extinguished itself. To Captain Briggs, witnessing this from the deck, it would have seemed like proof that the ship was about to explode. This refined version of the alcohol vapor theory suggests that Captain Briggs did not just smell the fumes but actually witnessed a flash fire. In response, he ordered an immediate evacuation, believing the ship could explode at any second. The crew launched the lifeboat in haste, tethered it to the ship with a rope, and rowed to what they thought was a safe distance. They waited, watching the Mary Celeste, expecting a massive explosion that never came. But before they could realize their mistake, the rope broke and they were left adrift. It is a theory that fits the evidence, explains the abandonment, and accounts for the missing lifeboat. It also explains why experienced sailors would make what seems, in hindsight, like a fatal error. Fear is a powerful motivator, and the fear of an explosion aboard a ship carrying flammable cargo is not irrational. Captain Briggs made a decision based on the information he had and the danger he perceived. It was a decision that cost him and everyone aboard their lives. Yet even this theory has gaps. Why was there no attempt to extinguish the flash fire if one occurred? Why did no one think to simply close the hatch and wait? Why did they not take food or extra water if they were planning to spend time in the lifeboat? These questions remind us that we are trying to reconstruct events that happened a century and a half ago based on incomplete evidence and secondhand testimony. We will never know with absolute certainty what happened aboard the Mary Celeste on that November day in 1872. What we do know is this. On the 4th of December, 1872, the brigantine Mary Celeste was found drifting in the Atlantic Ocean, her crew vanished, her lifeboat gone, and no clear explanation for what had occurred. The ship was seaworthy, her cargo largely intact, and there was no evidence of violence, piracy, or disaster. 10 people, including a respected sea captain, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that has endured for 150 years. The Mary Celeste has become more than just a historical curiosity. She has become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in our modern age of science and technology, there are events we cannot fully explain. The ocean is vast and unforgiving, and it keeps its secrets. Ships still disappear, crews still vanish, and sometimes, despite our best efforts, we are left with nothing but questions. For those who love maritime history, the Mary Celeste represents the ultimate puzzle. For those who lost family members, she represents an unbearable tragedy. For the rest of us, she is a haunting story, a ghost ship drifting through time, as much as she drifted through the waves of the Atlantic. As we close this story, let us remember Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of faith and competence, who brought his family to sea, believing the voyage would be safe. Let us remember Sarah Briggs, who trusted her husband and embraced the adventure. Let us remember little Sophia, too young to understand, playing with her toys in the captain's cabin. And let us remember the 7 sailors who served under Captain Briggs, men whose names are now known only because they were aboard the Mary Celeste on her final voyage. They are gone, lost to the sea and to history, but their story remains, carried forward by every telling, every investigation, every attempt to understand what happened on that November day when the Mary Celeste sailed on alone. The ocean holds many secrets. The Mary Celeste is one of them, and perhaps, in the end, that is as it should be. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some questions are not meant to have answers. We can only listen, wonder, and let the story drift with us, like a ship without a crew, into the quiet darkness of sleep.